Hello and welcome back to the second episode of my mini-series of how the combat system of the next Witcher game could be designed to fit modern action gameplay standards. In this episode I'm going to show you the basic combat maneuvers, so let's jump right into it. First, the offensive strikes. There should be two different strikes, a light quick strike and a strong slow one, but they should be more specific than in The Witcher 3. Meaning, in The Witcher 3, the strikes were sometimes wider or narrower. Light strikes should be quick, wide and deal little to moderate damage. That means they are good for fighting multiple opponents and crowd control, fast enemies, or when there's only a small time frame to react. The strong strikes are slow, vertical and only hit one opponent at a time due to its trajectory. That's the drawback for its high value damage. These strikes are good for slow or paralyzed enemies or to drain stamina from blocking enemies. In The Witcher 3 there were an automation to start forward movement with the strike, which often led to me get hit because I was changing positions uncontrolled. But I think the distance management should be more understood as an active task during a fight. To give the player more direct control over their actions, there should be a special move to cover the distance to an enemy out of range. For example, in For Honor, the Kensei hero has an attack to do just that by inputting forward, dodge and a strong attack. Ghost of Tsushima has a similar mechanic in the spear stance that covers the distance. But to avoid switching stances for every single enemy, the control scheme should be laid out so that the player can always do the specific move they want at any time. After all, closing the distance is not only viable for spears. Per default, the basic sword strikes are chainable up to a 5-strike combo. To motivate the player to mix up their strikes, there could be a little combo counter implemented to increase the damage the higher the combo count goes, and even more when they mix different sword strikes and later even signs. But that ability must be unlocked during the game progression. Introducing the Kick, a new tactical move to the Witcher series. The Kick is a standard move with the following purpose: to drain stamina of human enemies, open the guard of blocking enemies, to knock down enemies when they are out of stamina, or to push smaller enemies away against a wall, to do more stamina damage or potentially stagger them, or to push them down an edge when fighting in an elevated area. But other than for example a sign, the Kick does not cost any mana. It can also be chained in the before established combo chain, but not more than 2 kicks in a row to prevent players from spamming and maintain the challenge of draining stamina. The thrust is also the transition to the defensive moveset, because you need to hold up your guard where the point is already pointed towards your enemy and then tap Light Strike. The thrust has the following purposes. It penetrates armor, meaning it ignores a certain percentage of the foe's armor stats. It also causes a bleeding effect. The bleeding effect over time inflicts a small amount of damage, but more importantly, significantly reduces the stamina permanently. So it has its values, especially against heavily armored foes, due to the bypassing of the armor. But also it is strong against agile foes because the bleeding effect makes it easier to bring foes out of stamina and thus vulnerable. As shown before, humans out of stamina or smaller monsters like Neckers can be kicked or art pushed to the ground and lie there for a couple of seconds. To stab them, hold up the guard and then input a strong attack. High ranked enemies will receive huge damage, smaller enemies will be killed. But there is a drawback. The animation will have to cost some time. But why? The answer is the risk-reward ratio. The reward is high, but the effort low, so there has to be something to consider for the player. In the Batman Arkham games, other enemies will attack you when you start the animation, so you need to assess the situation and your resources. Do I have the time, or is it better to take out other enemies first? Do I need to R-push other enemies away and thus spend mana? Decisions. My vision is to make the defensive moveset an effective part of the offense, so there can be a back and forth between the player and the enemies, a little bit like in Sekiro. There are the following actions: the guard, the parry, an evasive sidestep, a dodge roll and a deflect. So let's dive into the details. The principle is simple. Hold up your guard to block normal attacks and wait until the last moment to parry the strike. This only works for weapon attacks and not for monsters. But to understand this mechanics we have to understand the different attacks. Normal attacks, they can be blocked or parried. Unblockable attacks, they must be parried to avoid damage. Unparryable attacks, this kind of attack can neither be blocked nor parried. It has to be evaded or better, deflected. But more of that in a minute. The parries drain the foe's stamina and also interrupt some attacks, but not all. Not all attacks that can be parried get interrupted. This way there can be exchanges, like they happen sometimes in Sekiro. As you can see, the foe unleashes a combo on the player, but the more strikes are parried in a row, the more the foe exhausts his stamina. So, what is an advantage to the foe in the beginning can turn to be an advantage for the player. The timing should be not as tedious as in Sekiro, but slower with more foreseeable combos, because we're not trying to make a Souls game, but a Witcher experience. So the player has two questions. Can I parry the attack and will it interrupt? Can I parry is answered by attack indicators, for example like in Ghost of Tsushima or God of War. Of course, there will be different patterns for different enemies the players have to learn. The interruptibility is determined by the foe's equipment, as you can see in this table. The armor and/or the weapon determine the moveset and also the stoppability of the normal attacks. Like in God of War, the evasive sidestep and the dodge roll are on the same button. Tap it once to just step aside or double tap to roll out of harm's way. The purpose of the sidestep is to avoid damage while staying close to an enemy. The dodge roll disengages so you cannot start an immediate counterattack. Speaking of which, there are skills that have to be unlocked to connect and counterattack with the sidestep, so the attack flow is increased and the player has more direct options to regain initiative, but later more. We have talked about blocking, sidesteps, unblockable or unparryable attacks, and the stamina bar of enemies. The deflect is an action to deal with unblockable and even unparryable attacks. A lot like the Mikiri counter of Sekiro. In my system the player has to stay calm, hold up the guard and dodge into the incoming attack at the right timing. By that the incoming strike is deflected and no damage is taken. But the attack is not interrupted, so there may come more strikes. But this way the deflect is super effective to drain stamina from the opponent when fighting big foes with unstoppable attacks. After the deflect any normal attack can be put into a counter, but heads up for follow-up attacks of the enemy. To regain initiative and increase the overall combat flow, there is a skill that can be unlocked to directly start a counterattack after an evasive sidestep. You can evade to the left or right and perform a light attack for a horizontal attack to the back, or a strong slower attack to perform a vertical slash. The player has to consider if it's the right timing to perform one of the attacks, because you might get hit if the strike does not interrupt the attacker, or if the hostile strike is a vertical attack, you might still get hit because there are no invincibility frames. I also have the idea that pole arms like spears, halberds or large maces can be trapped by evading and then countered with a Yrden sign. That way the foe is bound to the spot until the player hits them, for example, with a strong charged attack. An advanced skill could make it even possible to destroy the trapped weapon, so weapons that are difficult to deal with can be eliminated from the fight. So that's it for today. I hope you like my ideas and see the fun and challenge in it. Hope to see you again in the next video. The topic will be dynamic and expandable finishes.